In 1948, a book was published that sparked the sexual revolution. Unnoticed within it were the details of the sexual abuse of several hundred children. Who were these children? Who were their abusers? And how did the world's most famous sex scientist come to use the details of these sexual assaults as evidence of children's sexuality? In June 1944, Alfred Kinsey left Indiana on an 1,800-mile trek across the southwestern United States. He was going to a clandestine meeting with a man who was to become his prime source of information about child sexuality. The man was a U.S. government land examiner called Rex King. To protect him, Kinsey gave him the code name Mr. Green. His job took him across Arizona and New Mexico, trips he used to prey on children. He molested at least 800 boys and girls, recording the details in explicit handwritten diaries. When, in 1948, Alfred Kinsey's Sexual Behavior in the Human Male became an instant bestseller, no one seemed to notice the contents of Chapter 5. In it, Kinsey reproduced sections of the pedophile diaries he had received from Mr. Green. First, and with no independent corroboration, he published verbatim Green's detailed descriptions of what the pedophile claimed were orgasms experienced by the hundreds of children he had abused.
Extreme tension with violent convulsion, often involving the sudden heaving and jerking of the whole body, groaning, sobbing, or more violent cries, sometimes with an abundance of tears, especially among younger children.
Green had also carried out what he claimed were scientific experiments to determine the age at which boys were first capable of orgasms. For the experiment, he masturbated 317 infants and children from 2 months to 15 years old, recording which ones achieved what he interpreted as orgasms. Kinsey reproduced this as Table 31. In Table 32, he laid out the time it had taken Green to bring each of these children to these so-called orgasms. Green also claimed that his experiments proved that, given sufficient adult stimulation, some of the boys were capable of multiple orgasms. Again, with no way of checking the claims, Kinsey simply reproduced them as scientific fact. Finally, in Table 34, Kinsey set out Green's notes on the time it had taken him to masturbate the children to multiple orgasms.
The average interval between the first and second climaxes ranged from less than 10 seconds to 30 minutes or more. Even the youngest males, as young as 5 months in age, are capable of such repeated reactions.
The table suggested that some children, including a 4-year-old boy, had been masturbated over a 24-hour period. In his book, and based primarily on Green's information, Kinsey claimed that children could, with the assistance of an experienced adult, enjoy sexual activity from the moment they were born.
My father actually did mail in some questionnaires, I believe, to the Kinsey Institute about the sexual abuse that he was doing on me. At the very peak of when all the abuse was going on, there was a paper in a brown envelope, and it was kind of halfway out of the envelope. The envelope had blown a little bit, and I went to put it back on the dresser, and I saw that there were questions there. And it was a whole series of questions with little boxes in front of them. And I read one of the sentences, and I didn't know one of the words. And so I asked my father, "What is O-R-G-A-Z? Oh, he says that's orgasm.
But from what her father said about Kinsey, Esther fears the details of her abuse may have been used in his second book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female. In a section dealing with sex between adults and children, Kinsey claimed to have evidence that children can enjoy abuse.
The adult contacts are a source of pleasure to some children, and sometimes may arouse the child erotically and bring it to orgasm. It is difficult to understand why a child, except for its cultural conditioning, should be disturbed at having its genitalia touched.
But for Esther, some memories are so painful they stand out even 50 years later.
My school was going to have a little operetta. When I got on stage, I was so scared because I knew what was going to happen on the way home. My father put me in the back seat and, of course, continued to sexually abuse me. But I looked out the back window and there was a gorgeous, beautiful moon and stars. And it's very difficult to say it. It was a very painful memory to remember.
In his final years, Kinsey would testify before legislatures and courts that pedophilia was a less dangerous problem than public intolerance of it.